Let's start with the things that will be ubiquitous regardless of subclass. Your priority stats are recovery and intellect. 60 resilience is good to have both in PvP and in Grandmaster, but I'd hardly say it's required. You'll barely notice in PvP, and in GM, you can run sniper resistance instead. Outside of that, I run double concussive dampener everywhere in PvE. You'll also want ammo finders on your helmet and scavengers on your boots. In PvP, special and heavy ammo only drop if the person had it when they died. This does mean that if you're going to bring a special or pick up heavy ammo, you'll want to prioritize those resources so that you aren't further enabling your opponents to get more kills. It also means that ammo finder does nothing and your helmet mods should be swapped to targeting. Damage resistance mods do nothing in PvP as well, so use unflinching on your chest. Scavenger mods do work, so it's fine to leave your leg mods alone, but you can also switch to a holster mod if you're running a special. For weapon mods, a vast majority of the time you're switching between major spec for PvE and targeting adjuster for PvP. So, Stasis. Ager's Scepter opens up a lot of possibilities. There are some truly phenomenal build options that can make this combination insane. For our subclass, Glacial Harvest creates stasis shards when things get frozen, and Whisper of Conduction pulls shards to us. In higher difficulties, I've been saved more times than I can remember by the overshield from collecting a stasis shard granted by Whisper of Rime, and the damage reduction from being near a frozen target coming from Whisper of Chains. And Whisper of Rending increases kinetic weapon damage done to frozen targets, but we'll get back to that in a moment. Since Ager's Scepter is Ice Flare Bolts on steroids, it makes Bleak Watcher the most ideal second aspect. Elemental Shards turns those stasis shards into stasis wells, and Well of Restoration gives more energy back to your lowest ability when you get a well. So our first synergy in this build is freezing targets create stasis shards turned into wells that come to you and give you lots of ability energy. Resonance Siphon performs really well with this if you can find room for it. Our second synergy is going to be in building Super. If we throw Font of Wisdom on there, collecting those stasis wells gives a temporary boost to Super regen. And Mantle of Battle Harmony will give Super energy from the kills the wells came from. Once we have Super, Mantle of Battle Harmony instead starts contributing to our third synergy of weapon damage boosts. We add Font of Might to that to get another boost by picking up wells, and Elemental Time Dilation for the durations to stack. And we're already putting all of that on top of Whisper of Rending. And somehow, we're still not done. If you throw in the new Trials weapon, Reed's Regret, you have a Stasis Linear Fusion Rifle affected by all of those damage boosts except for Whisper of Rending. And to go with Reed's, we add Particle Deconstruction for a stacking LFR damage buff. Now, this is a baseline for what you can do. Obviously, you aren't going to be able to run this entire build 100% of the time. If I'm not running a Linear Fusion, or if I'm playing Crucible or Trials, I have a second class item to swap to. That's Solar Elemental for Double Bomber with a recovery mod so that I get Rift back faster and can use my Rift to get a lot of grenade back. Specifically in GM, you're much better off switching some of the offensive capability of this build over to defense. My go-to for that is swapping Mantle out for the Stag. Speaking of the Stag, let's move on to Arc, my personal go-to for Crucible and Trials. In Trials specifically, if I'm running with a group, I'm generally going to be bottom tree so I can give Arc Soul to my team. In solo queue trials, Crucible, and PvE below Grandmaster, I use middle tree, partially for the kit that includes a ranged super and melee, but also because I'm swapping out the Stag for Getaway Artist. Now, a relevant side note about Arc Soul that the game doesn't tell you is that when it shoots at a target, you get a decent chunk of grenade energy back. In PvE, what that translates to is near 100% Arc Soul uptime when needed. In PvP, because you'll have it shooting at something a lot less often, you definitely want to supplement your grenade cooldown with that Double Bomber class item and switch to often using your Rift to get your grenade back rather than to heal. Essentially, bottom tree with the Stag is for defensive and team-centric playstyles, while middle tree with the Getaway Artist is offensive. Since I've already covered all the PvE and PvP related basics that go into this, let's move on to Solar. With this subclass, there's endgame and then there's everything else. The endgame Warlock meta is Stasis or Well, which is middle tree Solar, but let me clarify what I mean by endgame. In raids, Lunafaction boots are god tier because you're giving that reload speed buff to 6 people. But in GM, the defensive capability of the Stag heavily outweighs the offensive capability of Lunafaction. Now the everything else. I save this for last not because it's the best, and your experience with this may be different, but because the veterans in my clan have some very strong opinions on this next exotic.
I better not see you wearing that shit at
That's
Atheon.
the problem with
Yeah.
if you're using high level shit.
You
You're
get
gonna
5
do
seconds and that counts the animation.
But you could do so much more with
Other
other
shit, no content. What am I gonna do with that?
But I still like Sunbracers, and they require very minimal setup for their destructive potential to be fully realized. Top Tree Solar gives you a projectile melee, and with Sunbracers, getting a kill with it gives you unlimited grenade energy for 5 seconds. If we add momentum transfer to this, the grenade damage will often have your melee off cooldown before your unlimited grenade energy is done. Then top it off with Ashes to Ashes to also gain more super energy in the process, and what you have is a very destructive cycle. When I'm running this, I also generally bring Monte Carlo with it. This gun allows for a wide margin of error with your melee without the entire build falling apart while you wait for your cooldown in the event that you don't get a kill. Alternatively, or in addition, you can bring out the Double Bomber so that your Rift will bring your grenade back faster to recharge your melee. As for Void, this subclass just isn't in the meta for me in the current sandbox. Not because it's bad, but because all these other options are either a lot better or a lot more fun. But don't get me wrong, nothing manacles Verity's Brow and Controversal are good exotics. And there's very little in this game that's more satisfying than chunking a Nova Bomb and watching someone's futile attempts at getting away from it while they struggle to accept their fate.